This is Paul W.S. Anderson, not to be confused with Peaky Blinders star Paul Anderson or Oscar-winning director Paul Thomas Anderson, who directed things such as There Will Be Blood, Magnolia, and Punch Drunk Love. No, this is Paul W.S. Anderson. This is the guy behind Resident Evil, Alien vs Predator, Mortal Kombat, and most recently in The Lost Land, starring his favourite Mila Jovovich and rising star Dave Bautista. And it's safe to say that he has a mixed filmography. The general reviews for most of his output has been mid to rough. But it should also be noted that nearly every single one of his films has a cult fanbase that defend it with their entire hearts, which I think speaks to something uniquely special about Paul W.S. Anderson. But the one movie that has always felt like it stood head and shoulders above the rest, the one that didn't require a cult fanbase because everyone pretty much agreed it was great, is Event Horizon. Now if you look at Rotten Tomatoes, it does seem rough, because the initial response to this film was like most of his output. It was average to bad. Roger Ebert gave it 2 out of 4 stars, saying that it lacked great direction, the characters suffered from a poorly thought out script, and compared it to what he called a much better film, Tarkovsky's Solaris. The Washington Post critic Stephen Hunter and Empire magazine critic Ian Nathan both called to the film's commitment to style over substance, and that the film is too vague in its answers, too distracted from a fulfilling conclusion to land the film in any satisfying way for the audience, which to me speaks to an incuriosity in art, but we'll get there later on, I promise. But time has been plenty kind to this film. It has gained a considerable fanbase over the years, decades even. There's even a whole section of its Wikipedia page dedicated to its re-evaluation, and it's comfortably settled itself as the best in a very mixed filmography. For a start, the film holds a very solid cast of Sam Neill, who was hot off Jurassic Park and In the Mouth of Madness. We have Lawrence Fishburne 2 years before The Matrix. We have Jason Isaacs 5 years before he became Lucius Malfoy, along with Jolie Richardson, Kathleen Quinlan, Sean Pertwee, and Richard T. Jones. But what's most impressive is that the film boasts a first-time screenwriter in Philip Eisner. Apparently, Eisner initially came up with the concept and pitched it as a haunted house story in space, which is a brilliant pitch. And Paul Anderson actually turned down the sequel to Mortal Kombat and the original X-Men to direct this because he wanted to stray from the PG-13 movies and do something more in the vein of a R-rated horror. And aren't we all glad he did? Now, before I get to anything, I just wanted to point out this funny opening screen where it tells us in 2015 there's a permanent colony on the moon, and in 2032, which is less than 10 years away from now, commercial mining begins on Mars. Just a funny idea of how time goes. In the 50s, everyone had this crazy idea of the future in the 80s and 90s, and then in the 80s and 90s, people had this crazy idea for the future in the new millennium, and then the 2010s, and even now, we're making movies with these crazy ideas of the future in the decades to come, and we'll all probably be in the shit and poor then too. Now, another interesting thing is these cryosleep chambers are a lot less like the ones in Alien, which seem to be like oxygen beds, and more like Star Wars Bacta tanks filled with water with oxygen tubes connected to their mouths. But the opening act feels very much like Alien and its sequels in the way it's shot, the character dynamics, the set design, etc. And even the way they're following a distress signal to a craft which is seemingly experienced some level of cosmic horror we've yet been introduced to. And not only does it feel like Alien and the previously mentioned Solaris, it feels like The Thing, Stargate, and many other sci-fi cosmic horrors. But it wears these influences on their sleeves. It is in no way trying to cover up or hide from the movies this film loves, whilst also not feeling like an explicit ripoff either. It's a difficult balance that the movie tackles very well. In fact, when researching this video, I found that the original script of the film involved more explicit alien monsters, and Anderson had rewrites done, apparently by more experienced screenwriter Andrew Kevin Walker, because he didn't want a mimicry of Alien and opting to add in more things like The Shining and The Haunting to really fulfill that haunted house feeling. And for all you nerds, Eisner also noted Warhammer 40k as a big influence on the script. Now, reading the initial reviews and reviews since the film took on a new life, I hear a lot about how the first and second act build this incredible premise and tension that the third act just lets die, and I just don't get that. I found the third act so much fun with such awesome makeup and tension, great set pieces, and the stakes feel real. You don't know who's gonna die and who won't. I think it's a great payoff for a well-built movie, and one of the things I love about this movie is that the good guys, Captain Miller and the crew, all do exactly what you think is the right thing to do. They aren't typical horror characters. You know, they don't do stupid things just to up a kill count. They're very intuitive and yet they lose anyway. There's something very special that a lot of horror movies don't risk because it could easily upset an audience. I think it also features one of the saddest deaths in any movie because it isn't built in any significant way. You just follow Lieutenant Smith very subtly throughout the movie as just a side character doing his job. He takes orders well, he plays everything by the book, he repairs the Lewis and Clark, and just as he does that, he finds the bomb Weir has planted and sees it about to blow in a few seconds. And Sean Pertwee just puts on this torturous sad face that is so painful to see. He did everything right and in the end he just didn't want to die. Now, like I promised, we're coming back to the critics talking about not getting straight answers from the film. Like I said before, it just feels massively like an incuriosity about film and art. Because I don't know about you, but for me, it's fun to not know some things when watching a movie, even pivotal things. I love films that withhold a lot of its soul to make the audience actively engage with the story and its ideas even when they're away from the movie and the credits have rolled. Prometheus is one of my favourite movies of all time, and it's a complete enigma. It wraps itself in endless mysteries, and that's one of my favourite aspects about it, that you never really understand it. You can chew on it forever and find more to love as you unravel your own thoughts and feelings. It's a gift that eternally gives. And Event Horizon feels plenty like that. Maybe not to the same extent, but definitely to some extent. It's the same thing with David Lynch, who critics also struggle to love a lot of the time, especially Ebert. However, I think time has been kinda to Lynch's work simply through the virtue of being art house movies that are definitely at times genre bending, but in a way that more highbrow critics are willing to take chances on. They believe that artsy movies like Mulholland Drive are vague on purpose, whereas distinct genre films, especially ones that lean into kinda schlock and gore like Event Horizon, are less favourable to those same critics a lot of the time. It must be underwritten or a lapse in judgment, laziness. It's undesirable for a movie like this to leave you with little answers. But I don't think this film is mistakenly vague. I think it reveals exactly what it means to and keeps close to the chest what it wants you to discover internally. It has no interest in holding your hand, and I appreciate that boldness in the film. But the silly critics were right about one thing though. This movie has so much style and the practical effects are immense and the sets they built are beautiful. I hate to harp on this all the time, but we really do need sets like these again, not just in sci-fi and horror, but just in general. I see well over hundreds of movies every year and well over 100 of those being from the current year, and I can count the amount of films with lived-in, impressive, beautiful and unique sets like these on one hand. Now, the behind the scenes of this film is so fascinating. Like Jolie Richardson calling the production cursed. They had 4 weeks to shoot the film. It was apparently a nightmare. Anderson said the cast were getting cabin fever from all these gothic inspired sets, and Richardson claimed the cast and crew were getting memory loss on set. But the trouble didn't even stop there. In post-production, the movie had a lot of interference from the studio to cut out a lot of the excess violence. Because even though the film was R-rated or an 18 in the UK, the producers still felt the film was way too gruesome. Some members of the test audiences notably fainted because the original cut possessed excessive gore, cannibalism and even more eviscerated bodies. There have been many talks of a director's cut over the years, as the original runtime was roughly 130 minutes as opposed to the modest 90 or so that we have, but a lot of the deleted footage has just been lost because back when they made the movie, DVDs and alt cuts and special releases with deleted scenes and alternate blah blah blahs weren't all that common, so the footage just wasn't archived properly, so the director's cut will likely never see the light of day. But man, just reading about some of the stuff they had, some of which I can't even say without getting demonetized. There is apparently a VHS floating around of the original rough cut of the film, but Anderson has not seen it yet, and his response to a true director's cut is still never. And I have never wanted a non-existent cut of a film so bad in my life. I truly hope they are able to recover some of that footage one day and put it out, because it would be something so incredibly special. But that's just me. What do you think? Have you seen Event Horizon? If so, what did you think? If not, will you? And whether it's a sci-fi horror about a haunted house in space or not. As always, keep watching movies.